Quran chapter 62, Surah Al-Jumu'ah by Sayyid Qutb. Translation by Muhammad Al-Amrani. In the name of God, the most compassionate, the most merciful. All that is in the heavens and all that is on earth extols God's limitless glory. The Sovereign, the All-Holy, the Almighty, the Wise. It is He who has sent forth among the unlettered people a messenger from among themselves, to convey unto them His messages, to purify them, and to impart unto them the book and wisdom, even though before this they were indeed lost in manifest error, and to cause this message to spread to others of them who have not yet joined them. And He alone is Almighty Wise. Such is God's bounty. He grants it to whomever He wills, for God is limitless in His great bounty. The parable of those who were entrusted with the obligation of Torah and then failed to fulfill it is that of a donkey carrying books. How evil is the example of people who deny God's messages, for God does not guide people who are unjust to themselves. Say, O you who follow the Jewish faith, if you claim that you are close to God to the exclusion of other people, then wish for death if what you say is true. But never will they wish for it, because of the sins their hands have sent ahead to judgment, and God has full knowledge of those who do wrong. Say, behold, the death from which you flee is bound to overtake you. Then you will be returned to the knower of the unseen and the seen, and He will tell you what you used to do. O you who have attained to faith! When the call to prayer is sounded on the day of congregation, hasten to the remembrance of God and leave off all worldly commerce. This is for your own good if you but knew it. And when the prayer is ended, disperse freely on earth and seek to partake of God's bounty. And remember God often so that you might attain to a happy state. Yet it is indeed so that when they become aware of the arrival of a chance of worldly gain or a passing delight, they rush headlong towards it and leave you standing and preaching. Say, that which is with God is far better than any passing delight or any worldly commerce, and God is the best of providers. This surah was revealed after the preceding surah of ranks, Al-Saf. It deals with the same subject, but from a different angle, employing a different style and with a new set of emotional appeals. It seeks to instill in the hearts of the Muslim community in Medina the idea that they are the ones chosen last to bear the trust of the true faith. Surah 62, p. 3563. This was a great favour God had bestowed upon them. The sending of the final messenger among the unlettered people, the Arabs, was a mighty blessing that warranted gratitude and reflection. And with this blessing came responsibilities that the community which had responded to the messenger and accepted the trust would have to fulfill. This blessing, moreover, was not severed from the flow of time. It was destined by God to grow and spread. The children of Israel had failed to bear this trust, and their connection to the heavenly covenant was cut off. They now carried the Torah like a donkey carrying books, devoid of understanding or purpose in its possession. This is the central truth that the surah seeks to establish in the hearts of the Muslims, particularly those in Medina at that time, whom God charged with the task of implementing His divine plan in a practical, tangible way. The surah also addresses those who would come after them, including them in the continuous line of the faithful across time. At the same time, the surah addresses specific situations within that early Muslim community as they underwent the long and difficult process of internal transformation. It seeks to free them from the distractions and hindrances that arose from a love of wealth and the immediate desire for profit, as well as from the inherited customs and cultural norms. In particular, it addresses the love of wealth and the diversions that it caused, which could hinder the acceptance of the great trust that had been placed upon them and the inner readiness required for this task. The surah refers to a specific incident. While the Prophet, peace be upon him, was delivering a sermon during Friday prayers, a caravan arrived from trade. As soon as the news of its arrival spread, many of the listeners left the mosque, rushing towards the trade and the entertainment that accompanied the caravan, as was the custom in pre-Islamic times, with drums beating and commotion surrounding it. They left the Prophet standing except for 12 men, among whom were Abu Bakr and Umar, who stayed to listen. This incident is reported, though the exact number may not be certain. The fact of the event is confirmed by the Qur'an's mention of it. This incident by itself reveals the extent of the effort that was required to raise that first community to its final level, where it became a unique model in the history of Islam, and indeed in the history of humanity. It also inspires patience in us, as we recognize the difficulty of building up souls in any generation, in order to form the kind of Muslim community that can bear the trust of this faith and strive to implement it in real life, just as the early community did. In this surah there is also a challenge to the Jews, calling them to wish for death if they truly believe they are God's chosen people, as they claimed. This was in response to their assertion that they were God's chosen people, and that the sending of a prophet to any people other than them would never happen. But the Qur'an asserts that they would never accept this challenge, knowing deep down that their claim was false. The surah further emphasizes the reality of death, from which they sought to flee, but which would inevitably overtake them. They would be returned to the realm of the unseen and the seen, where God would inform them of all that they had done. This declaration applies not only to the Jews, but also seeks to impress upon the hearts of the believers that this truth must settle firmly within them, so that they may rise to the responsibilities placed upon them by God. This is the general direction of the surah, close to the direction of the preceding surah of ranks, but with each having its own distinctive treatment, style, and emotional impact, all contributing to the same overarching message. Let us now examine how the Quranic style addresses this message. All that is in the heavens and on the earth extols God's limitless glory. The Sovereign, the All-Holy, the Almighty, the Wise. Surah 62p 3564. This opening statement affirms the continuous glorification of God by all that exists in the universe and describes him with attributes that are subtly related to the topic of the surah. The surah is named the Congregation, Al-Jumu'ah, and it includes teachings about the Friday prayer, about devoting oneself to the remembrance of God at that time, about leaving behind worldly distractions like trade and amusement, and about seeking what is with God, which is better than such fleeting diversions. Thus it mentions the Sovereign, the one who owns everything, in connection with the trade that people hasten toward seeking gain. It mentions the All-Holy, who is sanctified and glorified by all creation, in connection with the amusement that draws people away from his remembrance. It mentions the Almighty in relation to the challenge extended to the Jews and to death, which no one can escape, and the return to God for judgment. It mentions the Wise in connection with God's choice to send a messenger among the unlettered people, to recite his revelations, purify them, and impart knowledge of the book and wisdom, all of which are interconnected in a subtle and beautiful way. The surah then transitions to its central theme. It is he who has sent forth among the unlettered people a messenger from among themselves, to convey unto them his messages, to purify them, and to impart unto them the book and wisdom, even though before this they were indeed lost in manifest error. 2. And to cause this message to spread to others of them who have not yet joined them, and he alone is Almighty Wise. 3. It is said that the Arabs were called unlettered because, for the most part, they did not read or write. The Prophet, peace be upon him, is reported to have said, "The month is like this, or like this, or like this," indicating with his fingers, and adding, "We are an unlettered people. We do not calculate, and we do not write." Some have suggested that the term unlettered refers to the condition of a person at birth before learning any acquired skills. Others suggest that the term relates to how the Jews referred to other nations as Gentiles, Goyim, a term which in Arabic is expressed as ummiyun, meaning unlettered or of the nations, since the Jews considered themselves the chosen people of God and all others merely the nations. This latter interpretation seems to be more aligned with the context of the surah. The Jews had been awaiting the arrival of the final prophet, believing that he would gather them after their divisions, grant them victory after their defeats, and restore their honor after their humiliation. They would even boast about this to the Arabs, seeking favor through the anticipated prophet. Yet God's wisdom decreed that this final prophet would be sent among the Arabs, the unlettered people, rather than among the Jews. For God knew that the Jews' moral and spiritual condition had deteriorated to the point where they could no longer serve as the leaders of humanity. This is made clear in the next section of the surah. The Jews had deviated and gone astray, as was also mentioned in the previous surah of ranks. Their long history had shown that they were no longer fit to bear the divine trust. Moreover, this outcome had been prefigured in the prayer of Abraham, peace be upon him, which he made along with Ishmael, while raising the foundations of the sacred house. And remember when Abraham and Ishmael were raising the foundations of the house, praying, "Our Sustainer, accept this service from us. Indeed, you are the all-hearing, the all-knowing. Our Sustainer, make us both submissive to you and raise from our descendants a community submissive to you and show us our ways of worship and turn toward us in grace. Indeed, you alone are most relenting, most merciful. Our Sustainer, raise up among them a messenger from among themselves, who will recite to them your revelations and teach them the book and wisdom and purify them. Indeed, you alone are almighty, wise." This prayer, made from beyond the veil of time and the ages, had been preserved by God and was fulfilled at the appointed time according to God's wisdom and decree. It was realized in full accordance with Abraham's words here in the surah, "A messenger from among them, who will recite to them his revelations and purify them and teach them the book and wisdom," just as Abraham had prayed. Even the divine attributes mentioned in Abraham's prayer, "Indeed, you alone are almighty wise," are echoed here in the surah. He alone is almighty wise. The prophet, peace be upon him, was once asked about himself, and he said, "I am the answer to the prayer of my father Abraham and the glad tidings foretold by Jesus. And when my mother bore me, she saw a light that illuminated the palaces of Busra in Syria." It is he who has sent forth among the unlettered people a messenger from among themselves, to convey unto them his messages, to purify them, and to impart unto them the book and wisdom, even though, before this, they were indeed lost in manifest error. 2. The favour of God is clear in his choice of the unlettered people, elevating them to become the people of the book, by sending a messenger from among them. Through this messenger they are raised to a noble station, and from their state of illiteracy or gentilism they are transformed by the recitation of God's revelations and by the purification and distinction bestowed upon them among humanity. And purify them, indeed, it was a purification, a cleansing, that the prophet, peace be upon him, brought to them. It was a purification of their hearts and minds, their actions and conduct, their family lives and their social relationships. It was a purification that lifted them from the pollution of idolatry to the purity of monotheism, from false superstitions to true faith, from confused and murky myths to clear and radiant certitude. It raised them from the moral chaos of pre-Islamic life to the clean and wholesome ethics of faith, from the defilement of usury and wrongful gain to the purity of lawful earnings. It was a comprehensive purification of individuals and society, of the inner conscience and the outward reality. It was a purification that elevated humanity and its understanding of life, connecting it to the divine realm, making it conscious of the higher order of existence, and aligning its actions with the celestial assembly, and impart unto them the book and wisdom. He taught them the book, making them a people of the book, and imparted to them wisdom, enabling them to discern the true nature of things, to exercise sound judgment, and to be inspired with the right course of action. This was a great blessing indeed, even though before this they were indeed lost in manifest error. This was the error of the pre-Islamic era, which Ja'far ibn Abi Talib described to the Negus of Abyssinia when the Quraysh sent Amr ibn al-As and Abdullah ibn Abi Rabia to persuade him to expel the Muslim refugees from his protection. Ja'far said, "O king, we were a people steeped in Jahiliyyah. We worshipped idols, we ate dead animals, we committed gross immoralities, we severed the ties of kinship, we mistreated our neighbours, and the strong among us preyed upon the weak. We remained in this state until God sent to us a messenger from among ourselves, whose noble lineage, honesty, trustworthiness, and chastity we knew well. He called us to God, to worship him alone and abandon the idolatry of our forefathers, the worship of stones and idols. He commanded us to speak truthfully, to uphold trust, to maintain kinship ties, to treat our neighbours kindly, and to refrain from forbidden acts and bloodshed. He forbade us from committing immoralities, lying, consuming the wealth of orphans, and slandering chaste women. He commanded us to worship God alone without associating anything with him, and he enjoined upon us prayer, charity, and fasting. Surah 62, p. 3566. Despite all their pre-Islamic errors, God knew that these people were the ones who could faithfully bear the trust of this religion, for he knew the potential for goodness and righteousness that lay in their hearts. The Jewish community, however, had been corrupted by a long history of servitude in Egypt, which had filled them with complexes, distortions, and deviations. They had never fully recovered, neither in the time of Moses nor afterward. As a result, God's curse and wrath fell upon them, and they were stripped of the responsibility to uphold his religion on earth until the day of judgment. God knew that the Arabian Peninsula at that particular time was the best cradle for the new message that would liberate the entire world from the errors of pre-Islamic Jahiliyyah and the degradation of the great empires which were already decaying from the inside. A modern Western historian describes the situation of the world at that time. In the 5th and 6th centuries, the civilized world stood on the brink of chaos. The ideologies that had once supported civilization had crumbled, and nothing substantial had taken their place. It seemed as though the great civilization, which had taken 4,000 years to build, was teetering on the edge of disintegration, and humanity was on the verge of reverting to barbarism. Tribes were warring and tearing each other apart. Law and order had all but vanished. The systems created by Christianity were contributing to division and collapse rather than unity and stability. Civilization, like a massive tree, had spread its branches over the entire world, but it was now swaying as rot had spread to its very core. And amidst this all-encompassing corruption, the man was born who would unite the whole world. This description comes from the perspective of a Western historian. From the perspective of Islamic understanding, the situation was even darker and more dire. God chose that Bedouin nation in the desert of the Arabian Peninsula to bear the message, knowing that their hearts and circumstances were ripe for reform and that they possessed a latent potential for sacrifice and generosity. He sent among them a messenger to recite to them his revelations, purify them, and impart to them the book and wisdom, even though before this they were indeed lost in manifest error. And he will raise this message among others of them who have not yet joined them, and he is the Almighty, the Wise. Concerning these others there are various narrations. Imam al-Bukhari, may God have mercy on him, said, Abd al-Aziz ibn Abdullah narrated to us, saying, Sulaiman ibn Bilal narrated to us from Thor, from Abu al-Gaith, from Abu Hurairah, may God be pleased with him, who said, We were sitting with the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, when the verse from Surah Al-Jumu'ah was revealed, and he will raise this message among others of them who have not yet joined them. They asked, Who are they, O Messenger of God? He did not answer them until they asked 3 times, and among us was Salman the Persian. Then the Messenger of God, peace and blessings be upon him, placed his hand on Salman and said, Even if faith were at the Pleiades, men from among these people would attain it. This indicates that this verse encompasses the people of Persia. Mujahid, commenting on this verse, said, It refers to the non-Arabs, and to all those who believe in the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him among the non-Arabs. Ibn Abi Hatim said, My father narrated to us, saying, Ibrahim ibn al-Ala al-Zubaydi narrated to us, saying, Al-Walid ibn Muslim narrated to us from Abu Muhammad, Isa ibn Musa, from Abu Hazim, from Sal ibn Sa'd al-Sa'idi, who said, The Messenger of God, peace and blessings be upon him, said, Indeed there are people in the loins of men and women from my community who will enter paradise without reckoning. Then he recited, And he will raise this message among others of them who have not yet joined them. Surah 62, 3, meaning the rest of the people of Muhammad's, peace be upon him, community who come after them. Both opinions fall within the scope of this verse's meaning. It refers to people other than the Arabs, and also to those who belong to generations other than the one in which the Qur'an was revealed. It signifies that this community is connected in a continuous chain, stretching across the earth and time, carrying this great trust and upholding God's final religion. And He is the Almighty, the Wise, the one who is powerful and able to choose, the All-Wise, who knows where to place His choice. His selection of both the earlier and later generations is a mark of grace and distinction. That is God's bounty. He grants it to whom He wills. And God is the possessor of great bounty 62:4. Indeed, God's choice of a community, a group or an individual to bear this immense trust, to be the repository of His light, the recipient of His grace, and the point where heaven connects with earth. This choice is a favour beyond compare. It is a great favour that surpasses whatever a believer sacrifices of themselves, their wealth and their life. It is greater than the trials of the path, the hardships of struggle, and the challenges of jihad. God reminds the Muslim community in Medina and those who come after them, who are connected to them but have not yet joined them, of this favour, that they were chosen to bear this trust, and that a messenger was sent to them, reciting the book to them, purifying them, and teaching them the book and wisdom. He leaves for those who come later, hidden in the folds of time, that vast treasure of divine provision and the real-life examples from the first Muslim community. He reminds them of this immense favour, next to which all other values and blessings pale, and next to which all sacrifices and suffering seem insignificant. After this, he mentions what indicates that the role of the Jews in carrying God's trust has come to an end, for they no longer have hearts that are capable of bearing this trust. Hearts that must be alive, understanding, aware, and dedicated to the responsibility they carry. The example of those who were entrusted with the Torah and then failed to carry it is like that of a donkey carrying books. How evil is the example of people who deny God's signs. And God does not guide the wrongdoing people 62:5. The children of Israel were entrusted with the Torah and given the responsibility of upholding its creed and law, but they failed to carry it. Carrying it begins with understanding, comprehension and deep insight, and it ends with action to realize its meaning both in the inner life of the conscience and in the outer life of reality. But the conduct of the children of Israel, as depicted in the Qur'an, and as it truly was, shows that they neither valued this trust nor comprehended its essence, nor did they act upon it. Thus, they are like a donkey carrying heavy books, with no share in them other than their weight. The donkey is not their owner, nor does he share in their purpose. It is a miserable, pitiful image, a shameful and despicable example, but it is an image that conveys a profound truth. How evil is the example of people who deny God's signs, and God does not guide the wrongdoing people 62:5. This example applies not only to those who were entrusted with the Torah but failed to carry it. It applies to all those who were entrusted with the responsibility of faith and then failed to uphold it. This includes Muslims of many generations, including those living in this time, who bear the names of Muslims but do not act as Muslims should, especially those who read the Qur'an and study books but do not rise to what they contain. All of them are like the donkey carrying books, and they are many, many. The issue is not about carrying or studying books. It is about understanding and acting upon what is in these books. The Jews used to claim, as they claim even today, that they are God's chosen people, that they are His friends to the exclusion of others, and that all others are goyim or Gentiles or unlettered. They believed that they were not required to observe the rulings of their religion when dealing with the unlettered. They said, "We are under no obligation with regard to the unlettered 3:75, and other such claims that falsely attribute lies to God without any evidence." Here God calls them to a mubahala, a mutual invocation of God's curse upon the liars, a challenge that was repeated with them, the Christians and the polytheists. Say, "O you who follow the Jewish faith, if you claim that you are God's friends to the exclusion of other people, then wish for death if what you say is true. but they will never wish for it, because of what their hands have sent ahead to judgment, and God has full knowledge of those who do wrong. Say, behold, the death from which you flee is bound to overtake you. Then you will be returned to the knower of the unseen and the seen, and he will tell you what you used to do. 62:6-8. The Mubahala means that the two disputing parties stand face to face, calling upon God to curse the party that is in the wrong. Everyone whom the Prophet, peace be upon him, challenged to a Mubahala feared it and shrank back from it, refusing to accept the challenge. This indicates that deep down they knew of the truth of the Prophet, peace be upon him, and the authenticity of this religion. Imam Ahmad said, Ismail ibn Yazid al-Zurki narrated to us saying, Abu Yazid narrated to us saying, Furat narrated to us from Abd al-Karim ibn Malik al-Jazari, from Ikrimah, from Ibn Abbas, who said, Abu Jahl, may God curse him, said, if I see Muhammad at the Kaaba, I will go to him and step on his neck. The Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, said, had he done so, the angels would have seized him visibly. Had the Jews wished for death, they would have died and seen their places in hell. And had those who challenged the messenger of God, peace be upon him, gone forth to the Mubahala, they would have returned home neither finding family nor wealth. Perhaps this was not a Mubahala, but merely a challenge to them, since they claimed that they were God's friends to the exclusion of others. What then should make them fear death and render them the most cowardly of God's creatures? Indeed, when they die, they will attain what is with God, which is reserved for his friends and those who are close to him. Then God follows this challenge with a statement affirming that they are not truthful in their claims, and that they know they have not sent forth the kind of deeds that would reassure them or grant them hope for reward and closeness to God. Instead, they have sent forth disobedience, which makes them fearful of death and what lies beyond it. Whoever has not prepared provisions is terrified of setting out on the journey, but they will never wish for it because of what their hands have sent ahead, and God has full knowledge of those who do wrong. 62:7. In the final part of this discourse, God affirms the reality of death and what follows it, revealing to them the futility of fleeing from death. It is inevitable, and so too is the return to God and the reckoning for one's actions. Say, behold, the death from which you flee is bound to overtake you. Then you will be returned to the knower of the unseen and the seen, and he will tell you what you used to do. 62:8. This is one of those Quranic touches that penetrates deeply into the hearts of those addressed, as well as others. It settles in the souls a truth that people often forget, yet it pursues them wherever they are. This life will inevitably end. Distance from God in this life ends in a return to him, and there is no refuge from him except with him. The reckoning and recompense after the return are inevitable and certain. There is no escape, no way out. Al-Tabari narrated in his Mujam from a hadith of Mu'ad ibn Muhammad al-Hudali, from Yunus, from Al-Hasan, from Samura in a raised chain. The example of one who flees from death is like the example of a fox whom the earth demands for a debt. So the fox runs until, when he is exhausted and panting, he enters his den. The earth says to him, "O fox, my debt." So the fox comes out, struggling until his neck is broken and he dies. It is a vivid and profoundly suggestive image. Now we come to the final passage of the Surah, which deals with a specific instruction regarding the congregational Friday prayer in connection with an incident that likely occurred more than once, as the wording implies repetition. O you who have attained to faith! When the call to prayer is sounded on the day of congregation, hasten to the remembrance of God and leave off all worldly commerce. This is for your own good if you but knew it. And when the prayer is ended, disperse freely on earth and seek to partake of God's bounty. But remember God often, so that you may attain to a happy state. Yet when they become aware of the arrival of a chance of worldly gain or a passing delight, they rush headlong toward it and leave you standing and preaching. Say, that which is with God is far better than any passing delight or any worldly commerce, and God is the best of providers. 62:9-11. The Friday prayer is a congregational prayer that cannot be performed except in a group. It is a weekly prayer in which Muslims are required to gather, meet, and listen to a sermon that reminds them of God. It is an act of worship that is organizational in nature, in the way that Islam prepares for both this world and the hereafter within a single unified framework. Both are acts of worship. It has a special significance in conveying the communal nature of the Islamic belief, which we discussed in the context of Surah Al-Saf. There are numerous hadiths that speak of the virtue of this prayer, encouraging it and emphasizing the importance of preparing for it by washing, dressing in clean clothes, and applying perfume. In the two Sahihs, Ibn Umar, may God be pleased with them both, narrated that the Messenger of God, peace be upon him, said, "When one of you comes to the Friday prayer, let him wash." The four authors of the Sunan collections narrated from Aus ibn Aus al-Thaqafi, who said, "I heard the Messenger of God, peace be upon him, say, whoever washes and bathes on Friday, comes early and walks rather than rides, draws near to the Imam, listens attentively, and does not engage in idle talk, will have for every step the reward of a year's fasting and standing in prayer." Imam Ahmad narrated from Ka'b ibn Malik, from Abu Ayyub al-Ansari, who said, "I heard the Messenger of God, peace be upon him, say, whoever bathes on Friday applies perfume from his household if he has any, wears his best clothes, then goes out to the mosque, prays as he wishes, does not harm anyone, then listens attentively when the Imam comes out until he finishes the prayer, will have all their sins between that Friday and the next forgiven." The first verse in this section commands the Muslims to leave off trade and all forms of livelihood as soon as they hear the call to prayer, "O you who have attained to faith." When the call to prayer is sounded on the day of congregation, hasten to the remembrance of God and leave off all worldly commerce, 62:9. It encourages them to detach themselves from their worldly concerns and enter into the remembrance of God during this special time. This is for your own good if you but knew it, 62:9. This suggests that detaching oneself from worldly trade and livelihood required this encouragement and attraction. It is also a perpetual lesson for the soul. There must be times when the heart detaches itself from the distractions of livelihood and the pulls of the earth, so that it can be alone with its sustainer, free to remember him, and taste the special flavour of detachment and connection with the higher assembly. The heart and chest must be filled with that pure, fragrant air so that it can breathe its scent. Then the soul returns to the concerns of life, still remembering God. And when the prayer is ended, disperse freely on earth and seek to partake of God's bounty, but remember God often, so that you may attain to a happy state, 62:10. This is the balance that characterizes the Islamic way, the balance between the demands of life on earth, work, effort, activity and earning, and the seclusion of the spirit for a period from this atmosphere, where the heart detaches itself and devotes itself entirely to remembrance. This is necessary for the life of the heart, without which it cannot connect, receive and carry out the great trust. Remembering God is essential while seeking livelihood, for the awareness of God during this time turns the pursuit of livelihood into an act of worship. But even with this, there must be a period of pure remembrance, complete detachment and absolute devotion, as suggested by these two verses. It is narrated that Arak ibn Malik, may God be pleased with him, when he prayed the Friday prayer, would stand at the door of the mosque and say, "O God, I have answered your call, prayed your obligation, and now I disperse as you have commanded me. So grant me from your bounty, for you are the best of providers." Narrated by Ibn Abi Hatim. This image shows us how seriously he took the matter, in the simplest and most straightforward way. He took the command seriously and acted upon it immediately, both in its literal sense and in its true meaning. Perhaps it was this simple, serious and straightforward understanding that elevated that group to the level they reached, despite all the pulls of the Jahiliyyah, pre-Islamic ignorance, which is depicted in the last verse of the surah. Yet when they become aware of the arrival of a chance of worldly gain or a passing delight, they rush headlong towards it and leave you standing and preaching. Say, that which is with God is far better than any passing delight or any worldly commerce, and God is the best of providers. 62:11. Jabir, may God be pleased with him, narrated, while we were praying with the Prophet, peace be upon him, a caravan arrived carrying food. They turned toward it until none remained with the Prophet, peace be upon him, except 12 men, among them Abu Bakr and Umar, may God be pleased with them both. Then the verse was revealed, yet when they become aware of the arrival of a chance of worldly gain or a passing delight, they rush headlong towards it and leave you standing and preaching. 62:11. In this verse, God alludes to what is with him, which is far better than amusement or trade, and he reminds them that provision comes from him. And God is the best of providers. 62:11. This incident, as we mentioned earlier, reveals the extent of the effort that was needed to build and nurture those souls until they became that unique community in history. It also grants those who carry the call of God in every era a reserve of patience for the weakness, shortcomings, backwardness, and faltering they encounter along the way. This is the nature of the human soul, with its good and its bad. It is capable of ascending the heights of faith, purity, and self-purification without limit, with patience, understanding, awareness, steadfastness, and perseverance, without turning back halfway along the road. And God is the one whose help is sought.